Hey everybody, I'm coming to you from Panera today instead of the office because I am super not feeling well. So this is probably going to be a pretty subdued video and it should be pretty quick. Just sort of hold on to your hat and we'll go through this nice and fast. Now there's a lot more stuff that you can unpack in Women Hollering Creek than I'm going to go through today. But I wanted to go through just a couple of things so that you can see how working with theme can really work. Um, so this is going to be focused on the story. It's not necessarily going to be focused on the secondary source as well, just the story. So just so you keep that in mind. But the themes that we're going to be talking about today, as you can see, are hope and hopelessness, and happiness and unhappiness, which I think we could all probably agree are present in the story quite a bit. So as far as hope and hopelessness go, let's check that out. We can see two examples of hope and hopelessness. One is in Seguin, Texas, right? Notice I didn't say Texas, right? Because the idea of the hope comes from this romanticized idea that Cleofilas has for the place that she's going to go. Now, does that hope pan out? No, it doesn't. And, that's awful for her. What she ends up going through is awful. Um, so we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about telenovelas in terms of hope and hopelessness. So as far as um, Celine Tejas goes, and I'm hoping I'm saying that right. I don't have any sort of background in speaking Spanish, so if my accent is incorrect, I apologize. Um, so we see Cisneros tell us quite a few things throughout the story, um, starting off with Celine, she had liked the sound of it, far away and lovely, right? So we know that she has this idea, this romanticized idea of what it's going to be like. She even says a nice sterling ring to it, the tinkle of money. She would get to wear outfits like the women on the tele, like Lucia Mendez, and have a lovely house, right? So these are the hopes that she has for when she moves to go be with her husband, and are those hopes realized? Well, not really, right? Because what does she end up getting? Well, she gets if you look at the bottom quotation there, she gets a place that has a silly prize for a bronze pecan the size of a baby carriage in front of City Hall, a TV repair shop, drugstores, hardware, dry cleaners, chiropractors, nothing of interest, right? So there's nothing here that really is so much different from the town where she grew up in. She tells us, in the town where she grew up, there isn't much to do except accompany the aunts and godmothers to the house of one or the other to play cards, or walk to the cinema to see this week's film again, or to the center of town to order a milkshake, or to the girlfriend's house to watch the latest telenovela episode and try to copy the way the women comb their hair, wear their makeup. Right, so she has this idea, this romanticized idea, that moving to Texas to be with Juan Pedro is going to be this amazing thing. And then it turns out that that's not realized. She has these high hopes because of the hopes that she has for her life to be like the telenovelas. And instead, it ends up being just it ends up being her abusive relationship. It ends up being where she is taking care of her children all of the time, right? So we see all of these things. So um, that's how Texas kind of plays in here. We also see telenovelas happening in terms of hope and hopelessness. So the thing that they really inspire in her and that hope is that hope that she can have passion, right? The kind that the books and songs and telenovelas describe when one finds finally the great love of one's life and does whatever one must do at whatever the cost. So we see that she has this idea that she's going to find passion in her life. Um, does she? Maybe, right? We don't fully know. We know that she's bored with her life. We know that she doesn't, that her relationship with her husband is complicated largely because of his abuse and his infidelity. So, we know this. And she actually kind of brings this into perspective when she says Juan Pedro doesn't look like any men on the telenovelas, right? So she actually says, like, he's not like any guy on these shows. And then we see his actions that really show that he's not. And we see her actions that show that she is not like a woman on the telenovelas too. Right? He had thrown a book, hers, from across the room. She could forgive that. But what stung more was the fact that it was her book, a love story by Clarice Tellado, which she loved most now that she had lived in the U.S. without a television set, without the telenovelas. Right? So Juan Pedro takes away the one thing that she loves, right? That hope that she feels from the telenovelas, and he instead uses that idea, that hope that she feels from those, that entertainment that she gets, the thing that she loves, and he throws it at her, right, along with all of the other types of abuse that she has to suffer at his hands. So she's reflecting on her life in Texas, her marriage, and she thinks, um, oh, I apologize for the typo in this next quotation. Cleofilas thought her life would have to be like that, like a telenovela. Only now the episodes got sadder and sadder, and there were no commercials in between for comic relief and no happy ending in sight, right? So these things that she's hoping for, these things that she desperately wants from her marriage, the things that she wants from her life, that she sees on these telenovelas just does not come true for her, okay? And instead, she again puts herself in this position, and she says, "Well, what happened to Cleophas? Nothing, but a crack in the face." Right. So she isn't like these other women. These other women that are compared to, or their names come from, the names of jewels. So she is very different from these women that she thought she would be. Juan Pedro is very different from the man that she thought he was going to be. So, we can kind of see how hope and hopelessness plays in there. She has this idea for hope, and then what she ends up getting does not fulfill that, and then she becomes hopeless, right? She's worth nothing but a crack in the face. She becomes the abused rather than herself, right? She fills that role instead of being an individual, recognizing that she has potential, recognizing that she has the ability to, do great things. And it's not until the end where she finally takes matters into her own hands with the help from some people around her, um, and she's able to go out and live life, right? Or we can assume that she manages to go and do that, right? She has another element of hope in her life when Felice drives her across La Gritona. Okay, so another theme that we see is happiness and unhappiness. So we've got La Gritona, which is an example of that, and then we have family. So in terms of the creek, right? This is woman Hollering Creek. She she identifies right away pain or rage. She wants to know what is about this, what it is, why is this woman hollering, right? Is it pain? Is it rage? These are her two options in her mind. And when she first drives over it, as a newlywed with Juan Pedro, he points it out, and she had laughed. Such a funny name for a creek so pretty and full of happily ever after. Right, so she's happy in this moment. She thinks that she's gotten that thing that she's dreamt for, or dreamt about, um, because she's a newlywed. She's now going into Texas for the first time, and then as she gets there, she realizes that there's nothing. What do I want to say here? That there's nothing that is happily ever after, right? The Greek is pretty, but that's almost like a false pretty, right? And we can see that in the third quotation on the page about it being a muddy puddle in the summer, and then a good size alive thing in the springtime because of the rain. Um, but she was trying to find out what the name was about, and she was asking, um, and no one could say whether the woman had hollered from anger or pain, because it was of no concern how this trickle of water received its curious name. Right, so instead of people recognizing, the symbolism that Cleophilas found in this river, they just sort of set her aside, like most end up doing to her, until we see Felice and Graciela. Okay, so that idea of happiness, the creek brings her happiness. It does. She sits by the creek with her kids. She enjoys it. It makes her think about things. Now, sometimes it makes her think things that are a little bit dark, right? Because this is where that La Llorona myth comes in. But, she ends up transcending that, and she becomes the woman that she wants to be in the end when she goes over the creek for the last time. And Felice says that, or Felice yells. When Felice yells, like, she shows this feminine strength and power that Cleofilas has not felt in Texas, and that she hadn't felt at her family's home. So we can see that, Felice brings her hope again, and we can tell that by right at the end, that last line about Cleofilas laughing. Right? It wasn't Felice laughing. It was gurgling out of her own throat, Cleofilas' own throat, a long ribbon of laughter like water. Right? So the water ties her back into La Gritona, and it shows that it's not either pain or rage, right? It is something that's hopeful. It's something that's happy. She's free from the lifestyle that she's had to endure for the last couple of years. Okay. We can also see happiness and unhappiness in terms of family, right? Her family, Cleofilas' family back in Mexico, her father says, "I'm your father. I will never abandon you." He had said that, hadn't he? Only now, as a mother, did she remember. And it's significant that she remembers as a mother, because she now feels that same love for her children, or for her child at that time, that her father felt for her. Okay, and that's significant. She even goes on to explain, in her own home, her parents had never raised a hand to each other or to their children, although she admitted she may have been brought up a little leniently as an only daughter. Right, so we know how she grew up. She grew up in a home that respected, like, each person was respected, and they were never beaten. So when Juan Pedro had slapped her once and then again and again until the lips split and bled an orchid of blood, she didn't fight back. She didn't break into tears. She didn't run away as she imagined she might when she saw such things on the telenovelas. Right? So instead of being able to act in the way that she always thought she would be able to, she instead doesn't do that. And part of the reason is because of lack of experience with that type of behavior. Part of the reason is because, well, what else is she going to do? Right? She lives in a town where she's only got a few people that she can talk to. It's not until someone else, Felice and Graciela, interfere and give her an opportunity to leave that she's able to finally feel freedom. Um, but she also recognizes that things are complicated, right? Relationships are complicated. Now, violence really should never be part of a relationship in that way. I'm not condoning that at all. But in this particular relationship, she still finds things to hang on to, things that make her, um, before she leaves, before she finally just decides she needs to get out. And kudos to her for being able to do that. It takes an intense inner strength to be able to break free from a situation like that. But she still recognized in the morning, sometimes before he opens his eyes, talking about Juan Pedro, or after they have finished loving, or at times when he's simply across from her at the table, putting pieces of food into his mouth and chewing, Cleofilas thinks, "This is the man I've waited my whole life for." Now, it's interesting because there's an inflection here that we add as the audience. Okay, we know at this point that he beats her. We know at this point that she's unhappy, that she seeks the creek for solace, um, and so we infer, the man I have waited my whole life for. Is this literal? Should we take her at her word? Is this sarcasm? Is this something else, something in between? Is she unsure? Right? And so this kind of brings in that idea of happiness or unhappiness, right? Is a person ever in between, right? Can be happy in a moment, can be unhappy in another moment. And really, to be able to kind of unpack this quotation, it really depends on your interpretation of the story, okay? And based on what, as long as you can back it up, like I've told you, you're able to do whatever you need to do. Okay, you can form your own interpretation. This language was left there ambiguously for a reason, because it's up to you to determine whether Cleophilus is actually feeling like, wow, this is the guy I've been waiting for, or wow, this is the guy I've been waiting for, the guy whose smelly shoes I have to put out on the porch every night, the guy who goes out drinking with his friends and then, comes home and beats me, the guy who, um, you know, who's sent me to the doctor for an ultrasound with bruises and things all over me, um, the guy who cheats on me, right? It really just depends on how you interpret the story. All right. Okay. So those are just a couple of themes from the story "Woman Hollering Creek" by Sandra Cisneros. Again, I apologize for the unusually calm demeanor. But if you have any questions or anything like that, you know how to get in contact with me. And yeah, so hopefully you enjoyed this story. I know I didn't find it until over Christmas break, and I have to say, I definitely like this story. There's a lot to unpack in here, and we did not even scratch the surface. Okay, so please dig deeper, find the things that interest you in this story, figure out how these characters work with one another. All right, so hope that you guys have an amazing week, and I will, I'll get in touch with you. Okay, bye.